Today on ComixFM, we bring to you the last story of Daredevil, a ballad written in blood and blind faith. Daredevil, Cold Day in Hell, written by Charles Sewell and illustrated by Steve McNiven. Smash that subscribe button and let's dive in. Chapter 1. Old Man Murdoch. Snow fell like ghost ash over Harborview Cemetery, coating the graves in a pale shroud. The winter wind howled off Staten Island's harbor, slicing through scarfs and bone alike. A red cane tapped rhythmically against the stones as Matt Murdoch trudged through the drifts. He was older now, lined and scarred, his sightless eyes hidden beneath a weathered brow. His scarf whipped behind him as he moved with purpose through the maze of headstones until he stopped at one and tapped the cane against the cold granite. "Cold day," he muttered, voice hoarse from years of battles both physical and spiritual. "Colder down there, I bet." He pulled off a glove and cracked his knuckles as if preparing for a confession, then leaned closer to speak to the dead. He told the grave he had seen Jessica Jones not long ago. Her voice, he noted, hadn't changed, still rough as gravel and hard as truth. They had caught up briefly, though he hadn't dared ask if she could still do the things she once did. If she said yes, he would feel guilty. If no, she'd be broken. Better to leave it unsaid. She'd told him she would have come sooner, but thought he hadn't survived the war. He told her he hadn't fought in it. Not really. By then, he was out of the game. No powers, nothing special. Just a regular Joe. Then he smirked and corrected himself. A regular blind Joe. He paused, imagining what the man beneath his feet would have done in those days. "Swinging away," he murmured, knowing the answer. Jessica had asked him about regrets. He'd told her none, not a single one. Everything that happened, he believed, was part of God's plan. His life had been beautiful, he said, filled with joy as far as the eye could see. Then the camera of fate pulled back to reveal whose grave he stood over. Wilson Grant Fisk, kingpin, husband, father, king. Leaving the cemetery behind, Matt chewed on the phrase he'd uttered so casually, part of God's plan. He knew it well. Priests loved to wield it like a balm, a way to explain suffering without ever accepting responsibility for it. Outside the gates, a beggar asked for help, and Matt dropped coins into his hands. Light and dark, he thought, always circling, always trading places. He walked past a war bonds billboard, its patriotic colors faded by cold and time, and thought again of those priests, how they reassured their flocks with the same empty phrase. Eventually, he reached the ferry terminal. The clerk waved him through, and he admitted to himself how much he hated ferries. They were old, creaking relics prone to sinking. He preferred solid ground. Inside, the air was fetid and heavy. People pressed close, too close. Many coughed with sickness. Others were dazed from medication. Breathing felt like swallowing poison. As the ferry pulled away, Matt escaped to the deck, letting the icy wind bite at his skin like knives. The cold was brutal, but at least it was clean. Another passenger joined him, muttering about needing fresh air. They shared a brief agreement that while the harbor's air wasn't much better, it still beat the suffocating stench inside. Then the man began to rant about the DBs, about how everything had been left to rot, about disgrace and decay. His words grew angrier, and soon he was demanding Matt's opinion. Matt stayed silent. The man snapped, accusing him of arrogance, then caught sight of the cane and stammered an apology. Didn't mean nothing by it. Matt finally turned toward him. "You want to know what I think?" he asked calmly. The ferry passed the skeletal remains of the Brooklyn Bridge. Shredded banners clung to its rusted frame. "Never surrender, never forget." Matt's voice drifted back on the wind. "It's all part of God's plan." When they reached Manhattan, he muttered thanks that the ordeal was over. He thought of the kitchen. Marlon had probably handled the delivery alone. Snow thickened as he passed a subway entrance, sealed with tape that read "Closed forever." A beggar called out to him, shivering and hungry. Matt smiled gently and said he'd see what he could do. He recognized the man's desperation. These were dark times. He handed him money but warned him to take only what he needed. Others were starving too. Gratitude wasn't what came back. The beggar shoved him suddenly, and Matt stumbled toward the staircase. As he fell, thoughts fired like bullets in his mind. He could break his neck if he didn't act. He twisted, body remembering decades of training, but the snow-slick steps betrayed him. He hit hard, snow exploding around him. The beggar and a partner approached, sneering. "Should have left more," one hissed. Hunger was their excuse. Clarence grabbed him, mocking the blind man, while Georgie swatted his cane away. Clarence snarled that he was starving and demanded everything. Matt stayed calm. He told them he had about $30, enough for lunch, and mentioned his soup kitchen, Battling Jack's. just 5 blocks away. Free hot meals, no sermons, even beds if they needed them. No strings attached. And since he was blind, he wouldn't know them from anyone else. The thugs hesitated. One admitted it was good to know, but they weren't done. They yanked his cane away. Matt pleaded for it, insisting they didn't need it. They mocked him and tossed it aside, leaving him alive but crawling through the snow, reaching for the cane by sound and memory. He stretched, focused, and just when he thought he had it, thwack, it smacked him in the face. He wiped blood from his lip, muttered, "Heh, idiot," and pushed himself back up. Later, Battling Jack's house was packed. Angie, his partner in compassion, told him it was a full house. Matt said he could tell by how long he'd been stuck washing dishes. The kitchen hummed with chatter and clinking plates, posters of boxing champions watching from the walls. Patrons blessed him, but he deflected the praise to Angie. Then, the world exploded. Armed figures rushed into a subway entrance outside. A scream cut through the winter air. They've got up, and the rest was obliterated by a blast that tore the street apart. Fire and debris filled the sky, bodies and snow hurled like rag dolls. The shockwave hit Matt like a truck, throwing him backward. He hit the ground hard, face bloodied, body broken. Coughing in the toxic green glow of the aftermath, Matt gagged on acid. It smelled like burning hair and battery acid, but it wasn't a smell, it was sound. His skull pulsed with concentric red waves of agony. His radar sense, dormant for years, was screaming back to life. He screamed with it, clutching his skull as the noise became a hurricane. Voices shattered into fragments, roars, shrieks, distorted words. The world fractured into monstrous visions, snarling beasts, jagged teeth, grotesque faces. His head felt ready to split open. How? He thought. Why now? Somewhere in the maelstrom, a ghostly voice. Sticks, cut through. Get it together, Matthew. He forced himself to focus. Blood dripped from his nose, a brutal reminder of the present. He latched onto one sound, a child's trembling hand scratching through rubble. One thing, just one. Matt clawed back control. He pushed himself upright, face contorted in pain, but eyes blazing with purpose. "Find her!" he growled. He homed in on the heartbeat, dug through the rubble, and pulled the girl free, cradling her gently. She sobbed into his chest as he whispered instructions to the crowd. "Get her out. More explosions might come." Sirens wailed in the distance. "I can hear them," he assured them. "Help is coming." He dove back into the ruins. A man with a shattered leg clung to him, calling him old-timer and doubting his strength. Angie appeared, calling his name. He warned her the smoke was dangerous. As he inhaled, his senses surged even stronger. It was the smoke. The DBs had triggered his powers. He told Angie to get the man inside, and not to worry. "Be brave," he told her. "Help's on the way." Deeper into the wreckage, his radar painted the destruction in sharp relief. The subway platform was a tomb. Corpses lay broken and still. He heard ghost echoes of the attackers, one bragging about bringing something to their boss, another mocking the idea of wearing a mask. They wanted whatever the smoke could give them. Then he heard it, a heartbeat he recognized. He followed it and froze. Captain America stood impaled on twisted steel, his body a canvas of blood and grit, but he was alive. "Murdoch," Cap rasped. Matt stumbled forward. "Cap." Cap looked at him, incredulous. "What are you doing here? You're inactive. No powers. You could die." Matt spat blood and grinned. "They're back. The explosion. Maybe a dirty bomb. Radiation. DBs did it." He begged Cap to hold on. Help was coming. But Cap shook his head. It wasn't the DBs. His eyes shifted to the unconscious girl at his feet. "Take her. Get her out. She's important. She's the reason this happened. She's what he wanted." The structure groaned. "Go," Cap ordered. "And listen." Matt obeyed. He carried the girl through the collapsing tunnels as Cap's words echoed in his mind. There'd been a military shipment, chemicals from one base to another, part of the New Warrior project. Matt dodged falling stone, leapt through clouds of debris, and burst into the open air with the girl in his arms. Rescue workers took her, and Matt listened. Thump. Cap was still alive. He turned back. "I hear you," he roared, clawing into the rubble. "This is why my powers are back. I'm supposed to save you." His hands bled as he tore through the wreckage. The heartbeat faltered, then it stopped. Flatline. Gone. Matt froze. "No," he begged, insisting God had put him there for that reason. But silence answered. He knelt in the snow, head bowed, broken. Outside, scavengers in yellow hazmat suits combed the wreckage. Triple-ring mercenaries. One lifted Captain America's shield, awestruck. Another warned him their boss would kill him for keeping it. Matt emerged from the shadows, gripping a jagged stone, his teeth bared. "I see you," he growled. They joked, until one noticed movement. Matt hurled the rock. "Murdering bastards!" The impact shattered one merc's helmet. Gunfire erupted, snow spraying as bullets tore past. Matt leapt into the air, his old reflexes roaring back. Panic spread. The mercs piled into an ambulance and sped away. "You've seen it right now," one muttered nervously. Matt sprinted after them, snarling. "You can't hide! I've got your scent!" The ambulance roared into a crowded street market. Stalls splintered. Screams filled the night as bodies were crushed beneath its wheels. Matt's rage detonated. He calculated the jump, hurled himself toward the roof, but his aging body betrayed him. He slipped, slammed into the ice, barely catching a ledge before falling to his death. Gasping, he admitted bitterly that it wasn't the old days. He'd pay for this tomorrow. Still, his radar followed them. The ambulance vanished into the distance. "I've got your scent," he whispered. The mercenaries returned to their hideout and knocked on the wall. "We're back," one called. "And we brought a present." They argued nervously. One said a reckless teammate would get them killed. Another asked why they feared their boss so much. Their leader insisted the job had gone clean. Inside, among vats of bubbling chemicals, sat a monster in a man's skin. Bullseye. His scarred face twitched uncontrollably from a nerve disorder that made his hands shake. "Clean," he muttered with contempt. Pretty clean means dirty. He already knew about the explosion. A big boom. Exactly what he wanted. Now they'd wait and see. When the mercs unveiled their present, Bullseye's pale eyes widened. Captain America's shield gleamed beneath the sheet. "Oh my, he whispered, voice trembling. He hadn't seen it in years. He jabbed a chemical-filled needle into his arm, forcing his body to stop shaking, then leaned over the shield as though it were a relic. "I know you were there," he whispered to Rogers' ghost. "I know you wanted this too." One merc asked if Rogers would come for it. Bullseye scoffed. Rogers was dead. They mentioned someone else, an older, lanky redhead, dressed like a priest, leaping into danger. Bullseye's grin spread slow and wicked. Matt Murdock. "Of course, right on target," he whispered, staring out into the snowy night. In Hell's Kitchen, Matt knelt before an old chest. Inside lay crimson leather and steel, the Daredevil suit. He lifted the battens, snapped the cord taut across his face, and felt resolve harden like ice in his veins. Somewhere else, Bullseye cradled the shield and turned to a prisoner chained to a wall. Frank Castle, the Punisher, was mutilated beyond recognition. Limbs severed, body kept alive by tubes and machines. Bullseye pressed the shield close and mocked him. Captain America had been everything Castle wasn't and never would be. Did it burn to see him holding the shield? Did he want to touch it? Castle said nothing, teeth bared in hatred. Bullseye leaned closer. Cap was dead, and that red-headed priest who jumped into the chaos. Didn't that interest him? Castle snapped his teeth at him. Bullseye laughed. "Testy," he sneered. "Miss the old days? I sure as hell do." Snow swept across the city as Matt suited up. The chest lay empty. The window yawned open. Out in the storm, Daredevil soared once more through the skyline, the blood red of his costume slashing across the pale sky. His thoughts were steady and unshaken. Whatever had happened, whatever was coming, it was all part of God's plan. Chapter 2. Time gone by. The bells of St. Patrick's tolled across the city, in long iron waves that rolled through snow and smoke and brick. And Daredevil, who had heard their voice before, heard them again, clear even in the kitchen, as sharp and pure as memory. They were meant to mark a war's end, yet to him, they only confirmed the war that never ended at all. He remembered the old fight with Castle, remembered how he had once bent a bell's sound into a weapon, and now, in the drifting cold red suit, stitched and worn, and pulling at healing skin, Matt Murdock crouched and dug his gloved fingers into the crusted ground, while the bells seemed to ring from inside his skull. The tones were crisp, exact, like the first eruption of power when he was 12, fresh, almost unbearable in their precision. And yet he knew better than to mistake this for rebirth. His body was no longer 12, and whatever had sparked awake was a temporary flare. He bowed his head as the next strike hammered the air, and admitted, to the bells and to himself, that he could still hear it. With each peal, the sound thinned, minutely, almost beyond notice, fading a fraction, losing a hair's breadth of strength. Anyone else would have missed the drift, but he registered it because he was Daredevil again, if only for this thin slice of time. He pulled the mask tight across his face and settled his resolve in the space it left. He understood his powers were ebbing every second, a dwindling allotment that gave him days at most, maybe less. The blast came back to him in an instant, the detonation that had killed Captain America. Steve Rogers had died with an unconscious girl in his reach and the warning that the conspiracy ran deep. Rogers was gone, dead, and Matt closed his hands around his weapon and accepted the only answer: start. He threw himself into the White City, promising he could go deep as well. Somewhere else, Bullseye's mouth split into a grotesque grin as he observed that this man wanted to play hero. Matt's senses tightened in reply. He had their scent. In Bullseye's lair, a radio muttered static and broken reports about the Hell's Kitchen explosion, about radiation bogging the first responders. Bullseye twisted the dial, cursed the garbage reception. When one of his men leaned in to help, Bullseye snapped a flick into the man's ear that drew a bead of blood. The henchman staggered and asked why, and Bullseye, cold as cut glass, said he had been aiming for the eye. He told the man to get out and corrected himself over the hiss of the speaker. He wasn't looking for something at all. He was looking for someone. Someone special. Matt skimmed the rooftops and tuned the city like a wire, radar blooming outward until the whole grid trembled with detail. Roger's voice lived in his head. Listen, Matt, you can hear like a kid again. So what do you hear? The answer rose from vents and alleys and throats. Rage, it pulsed through New York. People were frightened by what had happened and by what might be coming. And in that fear-soaked weather, everyone looked like everyone's enemy. Down on the streets, the terror spread and hardened. Looters surged, knives flashed. Hands that tried to lift others were dragged down by crowds too frantic to tell help from threat. Matt thought, not for the first time, that weakness had no purchase in this world. People kept insisting they were strong, but it was fear behind the wheel. Back in the hideout, Bullseye bent toward the radio, speaking to it as if it were a person. Where are you? Why are you hiding? He whispered, and his cracked lips stretched as he promised. I can make you happy. You can make me happy. The frequency he teased from the machine was meant for a single target. Meanwhile, the blonde girl Rogers had saved stirred against the arms of a smaller child clinging to her. Sweat pricked her skin. Tremors took her limbs. A glow rose under the surface as she whispered that she felt bright. Her eyes burned white. Her hair lifted in the charge, and then the radiance burst outward and threw people back across the snow. Civilians screamed. Some shouted DB. Others clawed at their faces and howled in pain. The blind white wash from her transformation laid people out across the street. Voices erupted about ruined eyes, about sudden darkness, about the way she had burned like the sun itself. Matt pushed into the shockwave and marked the grid. This was not far from Times Square, and he remembered measuring that distance in his prime, 2 minutes at most. Elsewhere, Bullseye listened to shattered reports of a young woman hovering, loosing a bright wave of light. His eyes widened, and he snapped at his men to move. Outside, an ambulance growled onto the road with mercenaries packed inside. The panic widened. Civilians sprinted through the snow, newspapers snapping with headlines about endless war, some yelling to keep running because another disaster was underway. A newsstand window edged open. A man gaped as Daredevil swung overhead. Matt gripped the line and told himself he had done this every day once. Even for fun, he shut the pain out. Just be him, he ordered, and he let his body remember the work. As he crossed wire and roof, a pair of green eyes tracked him and knew the name, Daredevil. Through the wreckage he reached a woman with purple hair, lurching and clutching her face, screaming that she couldn't see. He caught and steadied her, told her he was there, and explained in an even voice that she had flash blindness. Too much light, too suddenly. It was rarely permanent. It would pass. She demanded how he could know. He told her not to be afraid and walked her to the first responders. A firefighter wrapped her in a blanket and muttered about the girl floating into the air. Matt's attention shifted. What was he hearing? What was he tasting in the air? He remembered the girl in the tunnel after the explosion, when Cap was beside him, strawberry lip balm, and pencil erasers fixed in his head. He felt the street under his palm, and understood that the girl had run. Her glow flitted across his radar in flight. He went after her. He followed the trail, and whispered that she had made it this far. And then the line cut. She hadn't escaped. She had been taken. On the road, the mercenaries' ambulance ferried her away. Inside, she slept while one of them leaned over her with a syringe and told her she needed rest. They talked about the street not being kind, about her being lucky they had found her. Another laughed that she was radioactive, just enough to matter. Their boss had given them a toy to track her. Grinning, the man assured the unconscious girl she would love meeting the boss. He was thrilled enough to lose his mind. Foggy Nelson's office throbbed with calls. He was on with a woman named Coralie, who pressed him for anything about Hell's Kitchen. He told her talk was all anyone had, that every government contact had gone dark. With Times Square breaking now, she asked if the bad old days were back. He saw a red figure perched outside on a post, Matt in the suit, and Matt pointed up, roof. Foggy wiped sweat and told Coralie the bad old days might indeed be back. He hung up, told his secretary Maud he wasn't going out, he was going up. On the snowy roof, Daredevil landed and Foggy was there. Foggy, Matt said, a breath of relief threaded into the name. Foggy stared and demanded if Matt had lost his mind. Matt told him he had been near the kitchen blast, that the radiation had flicked his powers on, that it wouldn't hold for long. He said the window was brief. He had to move. He owed the city and Steve Rogers the truth about who set off the bomb. Foggy told him he owed himself too, and he couldn't help admitting how right the suit looked again. Matt confessed that after Fisk, he had buried Daredevil. This second chance wouldn't be wasted. Foggy tried to knock the guilt from him and said there was nothing to atone for, but Matt's course was set. Foggy told him to live for the joy, if the clock had reset at all. While Foggy spoke, Matt faltered and the world dimmed. Foggy reached for him and asked what was wrong. Matt said he was fine, that the power fluttered in and out, not as fierce as it had been, but workable. Foggy pushed back that this was a path to a grave. Matt shifted the talk. There was a government program called the New Warriors. He needed Foggy to shake his contacts and find out what it was. He gave Foggy his bag, pushed the request into place, and swung into the dark. Foggy watched through his glasses and murmured that it was good to see him. Then he opened the bag and found Steve Rogers' old journal. Matt shouldered the pain and ran his route, using every heightened trace to lock onto the mercenaries. He recalled the way they had mowed through the market after the bomb, the path of ruin left like track marks, paint scraped across corners, tents ripped, debris dragged behind the ambulance. He lifted fabric and inhaled the exhaust soaked into it. They had salted the earth with evidence. High over the city, he tried the impossible. Thread one exhaust among the millions. He admitted he would have failed younger. Now he honed everything to a single task, until the line stood up against the noise. There, it carried him to their den. Inside, they drank and joked about the boss's delight over the girl, about the way the world would swing open for them, like Christmas lashed to a birthday. The baton struck first, splitting a skull. He stood and demanded the girl. The room froze, then recognized him, Daredevil. The leader sneered and told them to look. This was the one the boss had warned about. He asked if Matt was 100 years old. Not quite, Matt answered, and asked if they wanted to fight. The leader called for them to take him to the boss. He didn't finish. Matt's baton knocked him back. Chains rattled, knives flashed, bats rose. The ring closed. The violence was close and ugly. Matt told himself he was here for a reason, that this fit the plan, that God wouldn't waste him on this, that he wouldn't die today. He smashed blades aside with the batons and snapped his forehead into a thug's face, slid chains away, broke bones. Someone palmed a shuriken. Bats came down at him and he met each swing, carving a path. He vaulted the man with the bat and crashed his baton against another's knife. Blows hammered his ribs and skull and he kept moving. He kicked a throat, sprang as another bat swung through, toppled that man, took a knife across his back, answered with an elbow that crushed a nose. A crowbar slammed the back of his head. He went down, and a gloved hand rose with 2 shuriken ready. They argued, alive or dead. One said the boss would prefer breath, another leveled a gun and chose certainty. Matt sagged. The barrel found his head, and the man started to shape the line. How about that? I killed Daredevil, but steel blade stung first. A volley of shuriken punching into the left side of his head and into his hand. Blood burst, and he folded. Elektra dropped from above in crimson, blades bright. She told Matt to stand, that this wasn't his time. The sound of her voice and the scent that came with it stunned him. He said her name like a disbelief made audible. Elektra. She went through the mercenaries with unbroken precision. Guns barked, steel flashed. She cut and cut again. Matt, battered, watched as she worked without hesitation. He wondered how she could still be exactly as she was, how decades had left her untouched. As she took heads and left bodies, he shouted that she didn't have to do it. She ignored him, called the leader a rodent, and the men prey. The leader fell to his knees and begged. She said she was the beast and drew for the kill. Matt caught her hand and stopped the thrust. He met her eyes and told her she always had been the beast. He said he needed a survivor. She shoved one man away and told him to run and warn the boss that they were coming. Matt felt the shock of her speed, faster than his memory, and wrong in a way he couldn't name. He asked why she had returned. She said she hadn't come for his mission. He told her the radioactive blast had reignited his powers for a little while. He was spending what he had to stop the bombers and save a child. He asked for her help. She said that wasn't why she had found him. He turned from her with no time to burn. She stepped in close and locked eyes and said she could give him his time back. Any amount he wanted. As much as she had. Forever with her. The offer hung cold. Eternity at her side. Forever rang through him. Memory knotted, her hand in his. Her face the way they had been. The vision of her bloodied and unbroken. Sword in her fist. The recollection of her standing with Castle when Wilson Fisk died. The conviction that they could fight side by side again. Together. Forever. A blue eye wept blood in his mind, and the thought circled that one word until it closed on it. He shook it off and told her about the bomb that gave him back his edge. She told him the mercs were Triple Ring, though she didn't know their headquarters. They tied to an old associate of his, Bullseye. In Bullseye's lair, the Triple Ring leader reported the interference, described Daredevil as older but dangerous, and Elektra as worse. Red-clad, curly-haired, someone who clearly knew him. Bullseye enjoyed it, wonderful, and turned to a captive Castle strapped and tortured, and called him old friend. He then revealed another prisoner, the girl from the subway, bound in a machine coiled with cables. She spat that they were creeps. He leaned in close and murmured that he would never hurt her, that she mattered too much. She cursed back that he didn't know her. He said she was his proof of concept, essential to his plans. She hurled her energy, but the rig contained it and surged, and she screamed. He called her special, promised to keep her safe until the right moment, and left her with Frank. As he went, the girl gave her name to Castle. Tyra. Elsewhere, Matt wrestled with Elektra's gravity. A voice in his head told him to let her go, but she always wanted the world on her terms and he wasn't what she wanted, and told him to hold to what she had actually given him, Triple Ring. A dartboard with Bullseye set in the center. Meanwhile, Bullseye marched with his crew and promised that soon things would be what they had been. Not nostalgia, but the thing itself, saying they would see. Foggy called and laid out what he had found. The government's New Warriors program had tried to switch the powered community back on for the war, mining the old wells, super soldier serum, gamma work, radioactive isotopes, the same strain that had once made Matt what he was. Some isotope had been stolen. One barrel had become Hell's Kitchen. Many others were missing. Bullseye led his men into a warehouse stacked with radioactive barrels, grinning with cracked teeth and a glee that had no warmth. He told them this was the future. Chapter 3. The Devil Divine. WNYC's voice slid across the winter morning with the smooth certainty of weather, cataloguing the improbable. Witnesses swore there was a man arcing between towers, 50 stories up, a red streak threading the snowfall. Callers wanted to know who he was and what sort of man tempted gravity with that kind of arrogance. The announcer leaned in on the theater of it. Bright red, he said, brazen and deliberate, a uniform that refused to be missed, a figure who clearly wanted eyes on him. He tried out a name, the Manhattan Flyer, and suggested that after so many months with chins tucked to chests, maybe it was time the city looked up. Above those words and the sirens and the hiss of wind between glass canyons, Daredevil swung clean and sure through the snow. Far below, in the lair where rust and chemicals shared the air with laughter, Bullseye kept Frank Castle chained to the wall and treated him like an audience. He called Daredevil a red flag waving in front of a bull, a taunt begging to be answered, and his men snorted agreement, eager to oblige the challenge. Bullseye uncorked a vial, decanted a burn of cloudy liquid into a chipped glass, and called it medicine of the highest order, something potent he'd saved for the hour he needed to be his best. A hand near him muttered about the crash that would follow. Bullseye drank anyway, long and unblinking, and declared his hand steady as a surgeon's. He told the crew to prep the gear and the stage. He would join them momentarily. He turned to Tyra, still strapped into the cabling and clamps, and told her he was proud she was going places. She threw sarcasm like a blade, called him a psycho, told him to open the cage. Safer inside, he replied, and anyway he had something to show her. A hidden door groaned open to reveal a room with an armored suit sleeping on its haunches, an exoskeleton threaded with old cabling and blocky brain boxes, a relic from the first years his tremors had begun to haunt his hands. He told her he'd worn it then before the shakes worsened, a machine that translated thought directly into action, steadying the human flaw that betrayed him. They didn't build things like this anymore, he said with a tenderness he rarely spent on people. He fit plates and braces to his limbs, felt the old weight find its place, nodded once at the mirror the steel gave back, and turned for the door. On his way out he thumbed a switch. Castle's wall locks clacked and released. No time to play, Bullseye said with a smile. He had appointments to keep, but Frank might as well have a little fun now that his arms were free. He tossed a kit bag to one of his men, promised war, then pointed the rest into the chamber with a flat order. A job waited. Castle hit the floor and stayed there, one furious breath before forcing himself to his knees, blood slicking the concrete, a grin cracking the mask of pain as freedom found a home in a wounded body. He saw the armor and dragged himself toward it. With the black patience of habit, he rammed a docking spike into his side, swallowed the whiteout pain, and fed himself to the harness. Locks ratcheted shut, pistons caught, servos woke with a rising snarl. The machine's appetite met his rage like teeth closing. Out in the corridor, a patrol paced, trading jokes, hunting for Mr. Nubbs, with the lazy cruelty that hides fear. And one soldier told the others the man had earned respect in the worst wars a person can fight. Then they found him, standing in the armor like a statue come to collect a debt. A voice confessed a private shame. He'd never liked what Bullseye had done to Castle. Mercy would have been kinder. Tyra's voice cut from the restraints. Wrong, no one did this to Frank. Frank did it to himself. The suit tore the doorway apart and came through the dust like a tank. Offering deals tumbled into pleas as guns jittered and chattered. Castle met them with metal fists that turned rib cages to pulp. He swatted men like flies, slammed them into girders, crushed bones to paste. Tyra watched with a composure sharpened by captivity and murmured, "Yeah, see what you get," as red spray decorated the walls. A skull broke in his grip with a wet sound, and she called over the noise, "Told you he'd figure it out." Another face collapsed under a piston blow and she added, "Someone owes me $1." One of the last men standing sobbed a thin please. Frank wasn't listening. He lifted a screaming body and folded it until the spine snapped with a clean crack. "It's been too long," he said, an apology to no one. Heads burst, torsos bent at wrong angles, the floor ran. Tyra changed her tone only to point him toward the name that mattered. "The other guy," she said, "the worst one, Bullseye." She had heard enough when they snatched her to know where he was going. She could show him. They could go together. He broke the rig that held her as if it were twine. She stumbled into her own weight, dizzy and hollowed out, and whispered that she hadn't believed freedom would ever arrive. Death, maybe, or something worse, but not this. She peeled the metal band from her head, met the pitiless shape inside the armor, and said it soft and real. "Thank you, Mr. Castle." High above, Daredevil carved cold air and told himself the city was a predator. Always hunting, always feeding, always chewing its own tail. And he felt it, meaner than he remembered, fear gnawing clean through people and leaving pain to finish the job. He forced his mind back to the only priority that mattered. Bullseye's bombs. But his gifts slid and caught like a bad connection. The radar winked out, bled back in, threw him sideways into someone else's catastrophe. A man about to die in daylight, and he cursed into the wind, begged the senses to settle. What cut through instead was power, a surge climbing the grid as massive transformers came online. What needed that draw? The answer answered itself. Every screen in Midtown coughed up the same face, Bullseye, grinning as he swallowed the city with his voice. "Hello, New York City," he sang. Teeth bright as a knife, he preened, reminded the old not to forget, told the young the lesson by name, Bullseye. Daredevil perched in the dark and mouthed it like a verdict. The sermon rolled on. Once New York rebuilt itself out of ruin after every war, every fight. Heroes and monsters made a habit of killing each other here. Hope and despair twined like dancers, and the spectacle was obscene and beautiful in equal measure. Now, he spat. The color had leached away. Power had drained. Apathy curdled in the gutters. The city had forgotten how to feel, how to waltz with catastrophe. But today, he promised, memory would return. Below, people gathered in stupefied knots, understanding this wasn't noise, it was a fuse. On a roof, washed with floodlights, Daredevil stepped into view to meet Bullseye, and the triple ringleader beside him. "Right on time," Bullseye said, delighted. The leader hefted Captain America's shield and asked for the opening move. He owed the devil. Bullseye smiled a benediction, and as the man lunged, he withdrew the blessing with a single report. Blood spidered across the shield. Loyalty meant less than the camera's love. They circled, and Bullseye asked if the pain was a familiar comfort. Matt grimaced and held the line. Bullseye barked at the cameraman, "Don't blink, don't miss, or you fall next." The city was the audience, had always been the audience. Maybe the violence had always been for them. There was no path but forward. "Let's give Em a show," Bullseye purred. The first baton cracked Bullseye's jaw and echoed against the glass behind him. Pain animated the man more than it slowed him. He drove kicks into Matt's ribs, into his thigh, and the instinctive counsel in Matt's head urged escalation. Break him. But the part of him that refused that law admitted something dangerous. This felt good. Below, Gawkers argued about whether it was staged. Above, Bullseye confessed his tremors had forced him to adapt. Once he could shoot wings off flies, now it just took more bullets. Matt reminded himself, never stand where he wants you standing. Then the rhythm turned against him. A fan of needles glittered, whistled, and found skin. At first he dismissed the sting as nuisance. Then the melt in his muscles said poison. Strength bled out of him, legs filing for divorce from will. He went to a knee. Bullseye tutted at the anticlimax. People prefer finales with thunder, not sighs, and raised a gun. The crowd below swallowed breath, bracing for the execution to tattoo itself on memory. The shadow that fell across the stage tore the moment in half. Frank Castle came down in the armored suit like a wrecking ball. Bullseye greeted him with an old conspirator's lilt, and got his answer in the form of a crush that turned bone to grit, and a slam that snapped the camera off its rig. Tyra stood free now and shouted them forward. Frank hammered the stage with Bullseye's body. Shouts doubled into roars as the city recognized the Punisher. Not dead after all, and not inclined to mercy. The fight crawled into savagery. Bullseye clawed back, ripped a live cable, and rammed it into the armor's flank. The current shuddered through Frank and smoked out the seams. He roared, tore the wire free in strips, hurled himself across the gap, and the two became something uglier than men. Frank got the leverage, pinned him, and, animal and efficient, bit into his nose and tore half his face away. Bullseye wheezed, face a ruin, and Daredevil dragged himself to the site, like a penitent, to the rail. "No," he said, a word pulled from a night when Castle put a round into Kingpin's skull. Bullseye begged for salvation. Matt had only the same word. He locked a choke around Frank and whispered it again. Frank sagged. Matt held him while the city's noise fell to a hard, stunned silence and kept saying it, "No," until the rage shook itself out. Tyra wasn't convinced. She told Matt the calculus was simple. Bullseye deserved the ending Frank was offering. Matt looked at her and knew her, the girl Rogers had shielded, the light that had burned the streets, and told her that Steve had died for her, that gifts like theirs were a debt, not a crown. They were there to keep people alive, even when they failed, even when the person in front of them was Bullseye. He turned to the wreck of a man on the stage and asked the only question left, the bombs. Where? Bullseye nodded, as if at a private joke. He would show him. He thanked Matt, like an old friend, said they had always done this together. The crowd thickened at the edges of rooftops, drawn by the gravity of spectacle. Bullseye admitted the mob wasn't his doing alone. He could never have called so many by himself. The power that had let him had almost leached from Matt entirely. The world dulled and smeared as his senses guttered. Bullseye pulled a detonator. Panic sliced clean through the fog. Matt lunged blind, found a body, and drove both of them off the edge while Bullseye laughed. Falling. Bullseye told him this was the flaw in their design. They never stopped. Falling, Matt fought for the device. Bullseye told him purpose was a blade, and he was at last what he'd been meant to be. Glass gave way. A van folded beneath them. The detonator hopped away across metal. "I'm sorry," Matt said through blood. "I wanted another way." Bullseye smiled through ruin. "Don't be. People would remember. The show must continue." He tongued a tooth loose, spat it, and flicked it with the last clean precision left in his body. The tooth ticked the detonator. The city ripped open. Fire crawled the streets. Buildings slumped in on themselves. Green smoke drifted low, thick with the stink of sickness. Screams braided together. Some prayed it wasn't happening again. When the shockwave ceased, the only thing Daredevil could hear was the blank aftersound of a bell just rung. He limped into the wreckage and spoke into the stillness that comes one breath before panic finds its legs, naming it so he could push through it. He smelled the bomb's signature and knew exactly what it was. Another dose. A punishment tailored to his history. Around him, voices rose, blind and bleeding, hands clawing, fists swinging at shadows that wore neighbors' names. He looked down and took inventory. A steel beam had found his gut, nothing a surgeon could fix in the time he had left. Maybe this was the last move in him, the air filled with hurt and rage, and the soft sounds people make when fear teaches them to kill. He looked up and asked God for a path, how to help, how to spend the last of his gifts correctly. The radar only hissed back chaos. He stood anyway, found a seam in the pile, and dragged himself up a ribcage of collapsed floor. If there was a roof, there was a way to make signal out of noise. Exhaustion gnawed. Resolve grew teeth of its own. Maybe all the pain had been training for hours like this, not to triumph, but to refuse surrender. He climbed, hands shredding on bent rebar, lips filling with blood, a roll call of the names that built him, keeping pace with his breath. His father, Karen, Electra, Kirsten, Miller, Sam, too many to carry, and somehow the only load that let him move. For every joy there had been a loss large enough to cast shadow across it. Maybe the lesson had always been smaller and harder. Keep going. His body rebelled. His fingers slipped. He drove them back into the cut steel and told himself gravity was a liar. Pain kept pace. Light did too. At the top he found Tyra hunched over Frank's body. He called her name, and she snapped at him to get away. He was a bad man. He'd hurt the one who helped her. He steadied himself in the wind and gave her the truth with his name. "My name is Matthew." Tyra. Sometimes he was a bad man, he said. He had tried to be more good than harm. He always tried. She turned her face toward the voice and stayed angry. He folded to his knees, and a tremor swallowed him. This, he said through the spasm, was what he needed her to hear. The blasts had hurt thousands. The power grid was dead. Fear was swallowing the city. People were trapped in holes the helpers couldn't reach. The worst of it hadn't arrived yet. This, he said, was the reason for gifts. She listened, quieted, and agreed. For times like these. He told her the hour would fix itself to her life. She would never stop remembering it. She could hide in the dark, or step into the light. It wasn't fair. Burdens never were. But she'd been called. Then he wrapped his hand around the cold steel, growing from his gut, and pulled it free. Blood poured. "It's never fair," he whispered. Tyra rose. Light bled from her skin, then poured, then crowned her. He looked up and called her what she looked like, an angel, and understood the mistake he had kept close. He hadn't been chosen at all. He had been the instrument, pointing at the chosen. Her radiance unstitched the night. The fighting slowed and stopped as people saw what their hands were doing. Palms turned outward to lift, not smash. Sight returned. The poison of green drifted into gold and burned away. Energy washed through bodies and woke something that made them cry, afraid and amazed and relieved. Matt let the plan be larger than him. His sight cleared with it. The ruined eyes opened. "I can see it," he whispered, the words catching light as he lay back in the glow, finally ready to accept the end that had been following him, and at peace. And so ended Daredevil's ordeal, being the very hand and the eyes of God, being God's favorite son, too valuable for God to reject, and so loved that he was called back to God's embrace in the end. Thanks for watching, my Daredevils. ComixFM will be back with more stories like this. Till then, spread the word about our channel and keep supporting the comic book industry.